back to our series Progressing Music. My name is Custodis. I'm a musicologist in Münster, and today we have the wonderful chance to talk to Steve Vai. Probably all know him as the legendary guitar player he is, but today we'll experience a different chapter of his musical life, his compositional work, which even goes further back in his career. So, enjoy and let's go!
You look very relaxed.
I am relaxed. I'm always relaxed. All right. Okay, Michael.
Yo, so let's
start. By the way, I just love it.
Yeah, let's see how much time you got today because your approach to classical and rock music is so special. It's really something I guess also your fans would like to know. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I'd like to know your approach to classical. It's somehow there's one brain of Vai the musician, but is your approach to classical and to rock music different?
Well, there's certain elements of the way I approach the composing of my rock music that are similar than when I'm going to be composing with an orchestra. There are things that are similar and there's things that are vastly different. You know, rock bands have a completely different atmosphere to them, obviously. So, you know, and when I'm thinking about writing something for my rock band, it's a lot smaller of an instrumentation, and there's not a lot of written music involved because of the way that music usually is. Sometimes I'll take interludes or something and I'll write them out. And I'm fortunate enough to have guys in the band that can read music. And I give myself plenty of rehearsal time, unlike the situation many composers find themselves in with orchestras.
Yeah.
But there's certain limitations, obviously, because when you're sitting in front of a piece of score paper and you have, all of these musicians that have to do everything that you write, there's a whole different kind of a freedom to that. I knew that freedom dawned on me when I was a very young boy, very young. I don't know why, but I remember when I was 4 or 5 years old, I had this little organ. I think it was on my 6th birthday or something. My mom got me. And I just remember hitting notes, and I said, those are notes, and they go higher and here and lower there. And the whole construction of music kind of came clear. It was like realizing that you understand a language or something. And it was the only thing that I can remember in my life that I had an organic clarity with. I just instinctually knew. Of course, there was rules and regulations that you needed to understand in the composing world. And I understood that they existed, but instinctually and on an intuitive level, I knew that anything I heard, how it could be manifested on manuscript paper, even at like 6 years old, And a lot of that, I think, was influenced and also propagated by the music my parents were bringing home, and they had that they were playing in their house that has so much to do with the kind of music you're influenced in through life. And they were listening to, they brought home, or they had West Side Story with Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim, and that really pushed a button for me. I was very, very young, and I'd watch West Side Story on TV, and the music was so free, and it was so dramatic, and I loved drama. I loved the theater of it. I loved the story that the music told. Stephen Sondheim, and his lyrics, and the incredible depth of Bernstein's orchestrations, and the energy that he was able to create. It just captivated me. And I wanted to understand the language of music, and I wanted to master, what it all meant. I knew that it wasn't an arrogant thing. It was more like, okay, now I know what I have to study in life. and it was easy. It was practical. Music composition is practical. And you just have to kind of, there's things now I don't remember, you know. I might keep a range chart with me, you know. What happened that was interesting was I fell in love with that kind of thing. Now, when I started when I started taking this music theory class in high school, it was a profound shift because I was in 7th grade, so I was 12, and I had there was a high school class that you could take that taught music theory by this one teacher, Bill Westcott. And this guy was a savant. And he accepted me, I begged him, and he accepted me into his class when I was in 7th grade. So all through high school, every day, Bill taught me everything. I learned about orchestration, I learned about all the rules and the regulations, different styles of classical music. Now, one of the things I noticed that was very interesting was I didn't really have an affection for conventional classical music. I don't know why. You know, I would listen to Beethoven and Bach and Mozart, and I'd think, that's nice, but it's not really what I would do. Maybe that was innocently arrogant, you know. But I think the thing, I mean, of course, now I understand their brilliance, the brilliance of that music much more. But back then, I was interested in energy, you know, because my sister was listening to Led Zeppelin and Alice Cooper and, you know, Sly and the Family Stone. And that got under my skin, too. So conventional classical music wasn't really in my wheelhouse. And I didn't really listen to a lot of classical music until I discovered Frank Zappa. And Bill played me everything, you know. But it was like, I remember liking certain things, like Mahler, even though it seemed simple, there was something in it that was just so powerful. But some of the more complex stuff and avant-garde stuff, like Xenakis or Ligeti, you know, I would listen to that stuff and go, wow, wow. And then finally I heard Zappa, and that had it all. Because Frank did it all. He did everything that I always dreamed that I would like to do. It's almost like I manifested him in my life to show me the way, you know. He had comedy, there was drama, there was great guitar things, there was compositional, really in-depth, incredible complexity, but then simple beauty. And he was doing it by any means necessary. You know, and this was very inspirational, so I really grabbed on to Zappa. And then when I went to Berklee College of Music, that had a huge impact because of their library. They had a music library where I could go in and hear all of Xenakis, all of Ligeti, all of the Beatles, all of Maynard Ferguson, all of Stravinsky. And when I discovered Stravinsky, that was like a monolith, you know. He really had a good impact. And then Varese, through Frank's interest in him. And then all of the more experimental yet inspired avant-gardists, or I shouldn't say avant-gardists, I'd just say contemporists. That's what I found myself attracted to. And then eventually I started to really find myself being moved, you know, once I was in my mid-20s, and so by more romantic classical music. I embraced Ravel and these kinds of, you know, composers. But when I go to compose myself, I think it's kind of like I approach it the way, I believe, the way I've approached my guitar playing. Whereas I have all my heroes, and I learn so much from them, but I always feel weird if I'm sounding like them, you know. And that was always it was a very innocent impetus for me to shy away from being trendy and finding my own kind of musical voice on the guitar. It happened by accident, basically, because I never felt good enough really to copy my mentors, you know what I mean? And why? You know, it'd be like, studying, a piece of music and then copying it, just changing things, You can do that, and many people do, and that's fine. But when I would go to write, when I do go to write a compositional piece, I might be inspired by the dynamic emotional swings of Mahler, because his music is based on emotions, but I wouldn't do anything like that because I can't. Why? I'm trying to pantomime the brilliance of somebody else, and I have no idea what's going on in his head. You know what I mean? So it's food for thought. Same thing with Stravinsky. Same thing with all. So then I take all that, and then I create mental audio tapestries, and then just.
Let me pick up a few words. Today, I was really smiling when you picked it up yourself. I found a wonderful quote from Frank Zappa, because maybe you know it. It's from one of the documentaries where he's sitting and writing large scores on paper, and he is explaining his compositional approach. And he said, my composition and my musical experience started in high school when I heard an album by Edgar Varese. And I said, boy, that sounds great. I have to write some of that. Then I also heard of an album called The Rite of Spring. It was on a cheaper label. It cost $1.98. That excited me too. And I thought if anybody could make a missing link between Edgar Varese and Igor Stravinsky, that would be pretty nifty. Then somebody turned me on to an album of music by Anton Weber. And I said, wow, if anybody could get a missing link between Igor Stravinsky, Anton Weber, and Varese, that would be really special. Then I heard what some of my stuff sounded like that I had been writing. And it was so ugly that I decided to go backwards and get into the melodic area again. And then people started to tell me that my melodies were ugly. I guess I'm successful. And he said that live into the camera. And that was like, what brings me back to a question.
Frank always had some kind of, there was always like almost a subliminal self-deprecation going on.
Yeah. And but this idea of a missing link, that's something what you had a synonym for, like speaking about the heroes. Like for the guitar, and we know that you always dig deep. So when you know that there's a Jimmy Page, you want to learn not only about this hero, but about your heroes' heroes. So you also go back in something like a historical line. And when you spoke about your classical approach, you said that it seemed more like a huge family picture where Mahler was standing next to Stravinsky, standing next to Berio, to Ligeti. So it's not a historical way of thinking, but an aesthetic way of thinking, where somehow you bridge large parts of history because the music is interrelated. Mm-hmm. So do you also, like, is this historical approach, one standing on the shoulders of others, one hero in the line of others, is this a way of thinking which is somehow natural to you, or do you have more like the large family picture where everybody's interrelated?
Well, I think the fact that we're all standing on the shoulders of those that come before us, it's not a thought, it's just the way it is. You'll never be able to avoid it. There's nothing that you do right now that isn't somehow touched by everybody from your past in some way. So it's all in there. So I don't really think about it. I just do it. You let it happen organically because it's going to happen anyway. Whatever music I've been exposed to in my whole life has helped me to define what it is that I want. They're all beautiful inspirations, and they contribute to something just that's different than all of them. And this is great because diversity is really the spice of life. Diversity is where the beauty in life is, but most of the times, unfortunately, because of where we're at as in humanity right now, we kind of think that everybody should be the way we want them to be, and then everything will be fine. It doesn't work that way. When you accept the diversity, there's a real beauty that follows it because you're living it. You're living the diversity of your environment through you. And that flows into anything that you do creatively, which is almost everything you do. And for me, it's, I think if you listen to my orchestra music or my guitar playing, you'll hear, you'll hear various shadows of my influences. But there's also, and I'm okay saying this, there's a lot of me. And I don't know what that is. It's just my musical enjoyment, my bliss, my creative bliss. And that's what we do. And everybody will find their peace and their feeling of fulfillment. Matter of fact, the only time you're ever going to find that deep feeling of fulfillment is when you are expressing your unique creative potential, and everybody is unique and everybody is creative, and what a lot of people don't know is that it's okay. It's okay to be what you want to be. You'd be surprised how many people get caught in the perspective of, if I'm not like what people think I should be, then all the wheels are going to fall off. I'm not going to be successful. My life will be in ruins. Everything will be miserable. So I really better make sure that whatever I do is approvable by other people. And this, it sounds practical, but it doesn't work.
Right. Is there a certain point in music history somewhere where not the respect, you have a lot of respect for different kinds of music, we know, but somehow where the attraction for you begins, because you dropped names like also Ravel, but somewhere between Mahler and Stravinsky, it seems that's really the energy starts that's resonating with you. If we bring it back to the time of Beethoven, he was doing very much of rhythmic elements in the music. He's not so much with melody, but he's developing, for example, a complete symphony from a small motif, once in a while even rhythmic. So what's so interesting for me to follow is this line of references, this interrelations that I'm in your music, I'm hearing the Zappa and the Stravinsky and the brass elements, and Stravinsky was somehow, if we listen to Stravinsky, we hear the Beethoven. So indirectly, you also have a lot of heritage included, subconsciously and sometimes maybe consciously. But what goes through your mind when you listen to Beethoven? Because it's really a little bit out of your private taste, but still it's in the orchestral range.
Yeah. Well, for my feelings on when I would listen to Beethoven has changed dramatically through the years. In the beginning, when I was young and I wanted energy and I wanted intensity, I didn't get it. It just went over my head because it sounded too predictable. There was like, okay, I know where this is going. Oh, well, it didn't go there, but it went here, but I could have guessed that. Do you know what I mean? Especially like Mozart. To me, it just sounded like cascading scales, and I was 12 years old. You know what I mean? And even not until I was a young man that I was talking to a friend of mine, and I respect him musically very deeply, and I said, "Who's your favorite composer?" He goes, "I can never get enough of Beethoven." I'm like, So I started grilling him. And I took that new refreshing perspective and I went back and listened to Beethoven. And there was, I heard that beautiful, inspired brilliance there, but I'm not a musicologist. I don't follow what this guy was doing and then how, when this guy came along. I have some of that, but it's not important to me. What's important is what's out there now and what do I want to do? You know what I mean? So, you'd be shocked at how ignorant I am of the history of classical music.
No, it's not ignorance. It's you have a creative, artistic, compositional perspective yourself. this is different because when you write music, you're not writing a music history book. You don't have to.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So we're somehow, I try somehow to interrelate the historical with the aesthetic perspective, because there are some also contradictions which make it highly comfortable and highly challenging and highly rewarding for the audience, because art is supposed to surprise and not to be predictable. So you have all the artistic freedom. You somehow, that's your part of being creative. So you're not ignorant at all. No.
Well, I mean, ignorant. What I mean is, I'm kind of unaware. You know, it's not important to me. But what's interesting that I've noticed in my creative career that I'd like to share, that might be very helpful for people, that I've recognized in other people's creative career. And I'll talk about two artists in particular. One of them being Stravinsky. When you listen to Stravinsky music, all the way up to the point where he wrote the ballets, yeah, you can tell he was a Beethoven head. You know what I mean? You can hear that his construction of music was not conventional, but there was an obvious kind of influence of a whole movement, of a genre that could be heard in his music. But when he wrote those ballets, it was as if he dropped acid or something and just said, okay, now who am I? Who am I? And because they were vastly, and however he got that material, some people say, oh, he's influenced, he takes, you know, Russian folk music and develops the melodies. Who cares? You know, they didn't, the guy that wrote that Russian folk music did not write the Rite of Spring. You know what I mean? And when those Petrushka, when I first heard Petrushka, I was like, where, how, compared to his previous work, it was like a point came where he said, okay, enough of this. Who am I? Do you know what I mean? And he just, we have some of the greatest music, the most historical music, because of that little shift of him finding himself deeper with courage and no excuses. No excuses. He just did it. And everybody can do that when they have that, when that creative desire just becomes the boss. And another artist I've seen that in so obviously, which has added an incredible dimension of beauty to my life, is Tom Waits. If you listen to Tom Waits' first several records, you can hear a guy that was kind of searching for himself, writing beautiful music, but falling within parameters that people were expecting. But then it's like, it was the same thing. It was almost like, he had an epiphany and woke up one day and said, okay, enough of this. Here's this. So that happens in people's careers at different levels. And I've seen it happen for me. I mean, if anybody that might be familiar with my work, if they compare my first solo record, Flexible, with Passion and Warfare, it's a dramatic difference, you know. Something happened. And if you compare my orchestral music that's been released already to Passion and Warfare, it sounds like an obvious evolution. But when you compare something like Expanding the Universe, that's my paradigm shift.
Interesting is also to me that when somebody says I'm a radical, if we somehow bring this in a political agenda, we feel highly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But if we speak of radical and bring it into the realm of arts, to say, as you said, Stravinsky somehow was radical, he was courageous, and also Varese, that it's a different radicalism. In an aesthetic perspective, we really appreciate, because they take a risk. They take nothing for granted. They somehow change their world upside down and see what happens. And they also somehow take the consequences.
Yeah, truly creative people do not have a choice. They have to turn their world upside down or they will not be at peace. And when you listen to, and because in some people, there's such a drive to explore their unique creativity, there's no courage necessary. There's no discipline necessary. There's only an allowing that's needed. And this is so obvious because when there's this term ahead of their time that people use, but I don't necessarily think it's used appropriately, because I think there's music that's perfect for its time, that may be ahead of everybody else, but then there's music that's ahead of its time, but you won't know it for centuries sometimes, because people are just not ready. They don't understand it. They can't, they don't, there's a maturation period. And this is very obvious in the case of Varèse, because Edgar Varèse was an explosion of freedom, and he was writing this music. Nobody understood it. As a matter of fact, very interesting, I'll tell you this story, you'll love this. I also love Elliott Carter, and I have most of his music, and I had an opportunity to meet him. And I went and visited him in his apartment in New York City that he lived in for 65 years. He was 102 years old. And I brought his fourth string quartet, and he signed it for me. And I had a lovely conversation with this giant. And in it, Varèse came up. And he said, "Oh, yeah, Edgar." And he points out the window, and he goes, "Yeah, he lived right over there. He used to come over on Sundays for dinner." And I'm like, "Don't, tell me more." And he told me the story of how Aaron Copland had created this sort of like a composers union of sorts, And Copland didn't really get Varèse or Carter, so he kind of foo-fooed them. Now, Elliott Carter decided, I don't care, I'm still going to just do whatever I want. But this really hurt, this really affected Varèse. And he actually quit writing music. He quit composing for a long period of time because he was a sensitive artist, I guess, and he felt nobody's getting this, whatever he felt. Of course, lucky for us, he went back and composed. But we do not have a large body of work from Varèse, But a very interesting thing is, today, he's one of the most studied artists, and the one composer that is that we are revealing the brilliance of more today than ever. He was ahead of his time. Like maybe Aaron Copland was ahead of everybody else in a particular field, but and Mahler too. Do you know Mahler was like, some people thought he was mentally slow or something. There was, because his music was so simple. And but now it is perhaps the most studied, respected precious jewel that we have. And so you never know, and he was an intense guy, and he was just, difficult and all this stuff. But he let it out, and this is a beautiful thing when this happens. But that music is ahead of its time. And the other composer that I might point my finger to and say is ahead of their time is Frank, but not for the reasons you think. Most of Frank's music was perfect for the time. A lot of it was just ahead of everybody else. But I believe that Frank Zappa's synclavier work is genuinely ahead of its time and won't be discovered for some time. But I would not be surprised if in the future they discover his synclavier compositions, the uniqueness, the flow, the abstract perfection. Now the word unique is thrown around. I'm referring to unique in its most superlative form. Frank did that, and it hasn't been discovered yet. That's my feeling.
You often speak about Frank because he was so important to you, but how important, or let's try the question a different way. Frank, Frank's music is hardly discovered from his also orchestral perspective. And with the synclavier music, of course, you relate to that, and that's absolutely necessary to keep in mind. But I recently, preparing for our conversation, I also prepared my seminar starting next week, where we'll somehow have a look at music that brings different styles into orchestral music. So we start with Charles Ives, with Mahler, and we'll go to different references. Of course, we'll take a look at Rite of Spring, but we'll also take a look at Frank Zappa and comparing stuff he did with the Yellow Shark experiment with Ensemble Moderne. Somehow I tried to somehow also take a look at the late Frank Zappa orchestral work, not what he did with Nagano, but later. How much do you, when you write your own music with orchestra, do you once in a while find yourself thinking of Frank Zappa?
In my earlier compositional days, yes, because when I was exposed to Frank's music, there was like an explosion, because everything that I had learned before that was in the way of constructing music, in the way of orchestrating rhythmic things, combinations of things. It was relatively conventional, but I remember when I saw the Black Page, it was like a monolith that had appeared. Do you mean you can do this with sections of time? So that exploded in me, and I had recognized Frank using all sorts of rhythmic situations in his orchestra music that I didn't see in any other music, and that was fascinating to me. So in my early kind of compositional stuff, you can hear a lot of that kind of thing, like there's still something dead in here. That was all my funneling my Frank stuff through me a bit. But then after a while, I love Frank's orchestral music. I think it's perfect for when it happened and for what was going on. He was contemporary. The stuff he did with The Perfect Stranger with
was that with London Symphony and Kent Nagano?
No, that wasn't Kent. This was The Perfect Stranger with who was the great conductor?
Boulez with Ensemble Contemporain. Right, that was with the Boulez.
Yeah, like the piece that he did with Boulez is very rich, very frank, very not avant-garde, but very it's kind of atonal and perfect for its time. Do you know what I mean? Frank, I don't believe, and I could be totally wrong, that I think that his orchestra music will be studied and appreciated, but it's not going to be the thing. It's not the thing that's really, the fact that he could do it and the way that he did it, like with 200 Motels and everything else, that was unique, but it was perfectly on time. His synclavier stuff, it's another whole world. It's another whole dimension of music creation. I don't know how to even classify it. It's unclassifiable. That's ahead of its time,
Yeah, well, we have enough topics to pick up someday together. No, because it's something about understanding this music, but also knowledge about the background. Yeah. So I'm just happy to see how often his name can be heard still. Yeah, let's bring it a little bit more to your music, because the first piece I would like to present in the exhibition is There's Still Something Dead in Here. Okay. Because I went through all your music because I needed an example which is somehow compressed, which is short, but somehow which is so rich that I can have a small universe and open it up to all different dimensions. And what I really like still very much about Still Something Dead in Here, first time I heard it in the Netherlands in the concert live. And that was the moment where I thought, all right, I just have to get this score, because that was so Berio, Carter, and everything beyond. And it still was Steve. But what I also liked is that it bridges the time of Flexible somehow the young Vi to the mature Vi, because of course the piece changed. So maybe you could explain a little bit or tell the story about Still Something Dead in Here, because it's somehow two pieces falling into a piece.
Yeah. Well, back when I was transcribing for Frank, I was discovering the virtual limitless parameters of rhythmic notation. And the idea of these very odd polyrhythmic and polymetric things was really intriguing to me. And it was a great, I was experimenting in my mind, and I was just waiting for an opportunity. And that opportunity had baggage in my mind connected to it, like, well, you're not really going to be able to compose until there's an orchestra that's going to be able to play it. And nobody's ever going to want to play your orchestra music. Why? You're this young kid, you're a guitar player, blah, 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 blah. So this kind of like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this. And then finally, push came to shove, and I had built my own little studio, and I was recording Flexible, my first solo record. And in the recording of Flexible, there was no expectations for its releasing it into the world, or being successful with it, or having to make a career with it. There was nothing. There was only in the moment creative expression, the way I wanted it to be, because it was like my little secret, So that record is wildly diverse. I mean, there's like one song, the Attitude song, that basically birthed my career as a guitar player in the world. And was responsible for so many doors opening up, But then I remember I was on an airplane on tour with Frank, and I loved writing. Just music to me, it was so beautiful. It looked like art on paper, and I would just love to write music. I have mountains of, boop, beep, doo, doo, And I wrote that piece on a piano. I wrote the original piece on an airplane on the spare time that I had. I didn't use a guitar or anything. It was all just, and I knew what it was, you know what I mean? It was like painting something. And I said, okay, what do I have? I have a machine that can record overdubs. I have a guitar. Let me compose a piece that bridges the gap, that's completely, sort of atonal, yet incorporating all these ideas, brutally difficult with the melodic, the rhythmic situations in it. So it was really an act of freedom, and I just wrote, and I can even send you that. I mean, it's a little, it's on smaller paper, and you can see all the guitars, synthesizer, drums. I had to try to program the drums, and it was so enjoyable. And then listening to it afterwards, it was like, wow, this is so weird. Nobody's ever gonna, but that's okay. It's okay. I did it. I exercised that thing that was saying, would you please let me out? And I always loved it. I really loved it, because yeah, it's pretty abstract and very atonal sounding, but there's also other things going on that are just absurd, that you don't, I said, I want to do this. Yeah, but Stravinsky didn't do that. I don't care, I'm doing it, So I had this piece and I put it out. I had the nerve to put it out, and it lived like that for many years. But also in the back of my mind, I said, one day I'm going to take that original intention and manifest it. And that's when I sat down with the score paper and fleshed it out for There's Still Something Dead in Here. And that was so much fun to do. I loved it so much, because it's like Christmas, It's just like, And I thought, I don't care who's going to get it or not. You got to transcend that, because it influences what you do and it blocks your uniqueness, So I did it, and it was performed, and oddly enough, that piece people have requested the score to perform it without me even being there multiple times. And surprise, surprise, you know. So I'm happy that you're taking an interest in it.
Well, for me, it's somehow the starting point, because it combines so many aspects. Because it's I never know what people, what the visitors will know about you and your music. So I have to offer something for the expert and offer something for the totally newcomer, which both is absolutely okay. So I have to respect everybody. But I thought this piece has something for everybody. You can start on different levels and just start to discover what happens there. And I just love the sound of it. But
More insight into it. It might sound a little funny, but I had this cute little studio that the first house that I bought, in the backyard was this old tool shed, and I converted it into a studio, and it was like my own little private Idaho, you know, and where I would construct all this wild music. I used to have a snake, a boa constrictor, and I kept it in a cage in the studio. And one day it got out and it was missing. So there was a loose giant boa constrictor somewhere lurking in my recording studio. And you have to feed these animals, you know, when you have them, and I used to have to feed them rats. And this, I can only assume that the snake somehow got in someplace in the studio and got a hold of something that he didn't eat, but he killed, because you know what that smells like when you've got like something decomposing in the wall of a room? It's not good. It doesn't sound good at all. It sounds like somebody is pulling the nose hairs out with a tweezer, you know. So I thought, I was surrounded by this odor constantly, and when I thought about doing There's Something Dead in Here, I thought, damn, what would that smell sound like?
well, at least your snake didn't eat guitar players.
Yeah, well, he did take a chunk out of me once. But the funny thing was, I was creating this scenario in my head where there's this cartoon snake and a cartoon rat chasing each other, and you can so much of the motifs in it are a pictorial audio for a pictorial. This creative tool, you know. It doesn't matter what you grab, you know.
But now let's make it my Christmas time. So if you would not only send the score, but also your charts, your sketches, that would be a great story, because the music is impressive, but the story is also funny. So if you have great music with a smile, that's always very attractive.
Yeah.
I would like to ask for a third composition, because what I love discussing with you is we start with details and we end somewhere else. So let's bring another detail in. It's expanding the universe. Yeah. Because in your rock world, you often tell certain stories with your music. Not all the time literally really telling a story, but there are pictures involved, emotions involved, but like semantic elements. You have something to tell. And with expanding the universe, especially with the different titles of the different parts, there's something you really tell. So first I would like to ask, what's the story? What's the idea of expanding the universe?
Well, it came from the same place that the intention to do There's Still Something Dead in Here came from. Meaning, I visualized myself performing guitar with an orchestra, not on conventional type pieces that appear on the first Sound Theories record, like Kill the Guy with the Ball or the Attitude Song. These are all songs. But instead, I projected to creating a piece of music where I was, you know, almost central for a good part of it, and to integrate the guitar with the orchestra in ways that worked, and not have the orchestra just be an extraneous kind of support to my melodies. Because if you listen to Expanding the Universe, it's parts are very integrated with the orchestra, very close. You know, you couldn't have one without the other. You know, so that was it all started out as a visual, a mental audio visual, so to speak, and then I just started refining it, and then, you know, the impossible turns into the possible when you start doing it, and I just sat down and it was all there. The picture of the entire piece was there, not the particulars, but the intention of the piece. And I knew I wanted it to go through all these changes, and I wanted it to be incredibly noisy at times, frightening. There's parts of that song that actually frighten me, you know. And I mean, it's just unnerving, you know, some of the intensity of the orchestra. But also parts that were just really delicate and beautiful and melodic. I love really deeply touching melodic kinds of things. And, you know, like that whole first part where I'm singing and playing the simple, you know, At the End of the World is the name of the movement. I love that. And it has no place in a conventional contemporary piece of music. You know, it would never be done. You'd never hear anything like that, and that's what I love. You know. So I started to do it, and then we performed it. It was performed several times, and it was a lot of work on my part because the guitar part is very challenging, and following a conductor for a rock musician is a challenge in and of itself. So when I got the recording from the performance. I didn't appreciate that composition for years. And now I see the potential of it being a very unique piece of music in my repertoire.